Jody, if I
So,
may, before you start, I
sure.
also want to acknowledge Mayor Lily May has also joined the meeting as well. So welcome, Mayor May, and appreciate having you here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So, Hans and Rajiv have gone over a little bit of the project purpose. Here's a little bit about the project development process. Many of you attended in June our first public meeting where we were just going over the initial start of this project. We have now taken in a lot of public comment and as well as your survey input, and we have developed the concepts that are a little bit more realistic. I won't say that they're in final design yet, but we have something to present today that we're interested in gathering, again, your reaction to. And so once we get that information and we've been able to incorporate that, we will be finishing up our environmental studies. We will also be coordinating with Caltrans because they have a facility here that we will be engaging with. And we'll be culminating our project design as well as these environmental studies into a document that will be posted for review, for public review. And at such time, we will come back so that you have the opportunity to not only review the project, but the environmental implications of that project, both positive as well as the impacts that we may have to mitigate, and provide us your comments on whether we have indeed exhaustively reviewed the project and if there's anything else we should consider before the City Council would choose to adopt and forward this project into final design. So even though this is our second meeting, as you can see, there are more opportunities to be heard throughout the process. So let's dive right in. The project setting. What we've tried to do here is accentuate very key indicators, not indicators, but elements that are on the ground that we are working with. First and foremost, Saber-Cat Historical Park on our right is an incredible resource. The trail and the park itself is very loved, and there has been a vision to connect that over the I-80, I-680 freeway area. As you can see on the west side of the I-680, there is a large Caltrans right-of-way, which is still in use today. But also bisecting that property is the Hayward Fault Zone. This is something that we're very, very cognizant of. And in fact, the city has rightfully reserved this area to be not a condoned for buildable. So it's a greenway. So something like a path that that doesn't have a structure to it can very well be accommodated within that zone, but other structures are are advised to be outside of that. As we proceed further west, we have the future East Bay Greenway, which is already being planned to connect to the north as part of the future Irvington BART station. Right at the Washington Boulevard area, there are plans on how it will connect in and through the station, and then eventually in the future, it would continue all the way down Osgood Road. As we proceed further west over to what we see is Blakehow, this area right here had already been, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but if you can direct your eyes to the farthest west on Blakehow Road, that was a roadway that had initially been thought to continue straight through or under or over the BART Union Pacific Railroad corridor, and now is being considered more for a bicycle and pedestrian crossing rather than a full roadway. And if you also notice on the very far north, Washington Boulevard is a very large arterial. And as you proceed eastward over to the freeway, the shoulders actually go away. And so we've noted here that there are some barriers for safe pedestrian and bicycle access in this area. And thus this trail is being considered. So what we did in June, for those again who were not here, we did present this scoping report, which was prepared and published in December of 2018. It provided an overview or a vision, if you will, for this project. And that's what we started with. And that's what we presented in June, just so we could certainly understand the vision, but more in more detail, understand what the public and those residents that live closest feel about this project and give us some direction. And in that scoping report was exactly what I tried to convey here, that there was a vision for a trail that would cross over the Union Pacific BART rail corridor, connect down at Blake Howe Road, cross Osgood Road, and proceed eastward into the Caltrans, I shouldn't say Caltrans, it is the I-680 right-of-way, which is somewhat of a large mound that has been growing through the development of nearby freeway projects. So while it started with the construction of I-680, it has also been augmented over time. And then this West Bridge landing to the middle of your screen becomes somewhat of a plaza as it continues over in a large bridge over the freeway, again, having to have clearance and trying not to impede any of the circulation there, being outside of the shoulders, and then over landing at the same grade with the park, so that there's all of this trail could be ADA accessible, which means that the slopes would not be any steeper than 5% grade. Also, there is a vision as part of this trail to incorporate nearby, at least in association with this trail, or somehow have that linkage to the Saber-Cat Historical Park, a paleontological museum, so that one could visit the museum and then also visit the park, really where these paleontological resources have been found, and how and marking the value of that to this community, because it really has made a difference in the paleontological history of how these fossils have been documented, and they are actually even known for this community as the Irvingtonian era. And then that's part of a future vision. The other future project is the North Trail, we're calling it, the north piece that would actually continue north up to the BART station via what I was showing you was an open space area that's been more or less left unbuilt, although there are private properties that continue over it. There's no structures in the way to possibly allow a trail that could continue grade separated from the roadway and connect directly up to the BART station. So that was the vision. And we'll talk now about what we received from the public during that June period of time. We received comments during the public meeting. We also posted a survey on the web, which was filled out by over 40, I believe it was 46 individuals. Thank you very much for the time that you've spent to provide us that input. So this input, and then of course, after that meeting, we received emails, letters, and all of that has been culminated into not only a meeting summary, but also a survey summary that you can look at and review on the web. And we're here today to talk about how those comments have actually influenced and are reflected in the project designs that we've created to date. So just for brevity right now, I'm going to review some of the major themes, but then there's going to be more detail about the public comments that we received as we talk about the project. So just for everybody's understanding of the kind of the big themes, we heard that there was a considerable concern about the suitability of the existing Saber-Cat Trail inside Saber-Cat Historical Park, and how our planned extension might influence whether that would be compatible or not. And so the city is going to talk a little bit about that in the subsequent slides. Safety was another theme that was brought up quite often. Some individuals were interested in lighting and others were not. What were the hours of operation? Is it going to be an ADA accessible trail? And yes, it is. That's definitely a yes to that. There is a lot of interest on the Paleontological Museum and how and what it will serve for this community. And we're very delighted to know that there's a lot of community support for that. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that is evolving right now through the project and through discussions with Caltrans. And there are nicely, some of the citizens took us very seriously and provided some suggestions on trail routing and overcrossings. We specifically asked for the themes and the design concerns. And we received not only good input on all of those, but we also received suggestions on some different types of bridges. So that was very, very useful. There are two major structures in this outside of the museum along this trail. One is the Union Pacific and BART crossing, and the other, of course, is the I-680 overcrossing bridge. And so we're going to be stepping through those in more detail. But on the BART overcrossing, there was interestingly a balanced preference for both under and over, but we actually received more conscientious concerns about the safety, not so much whether it's over or under, but whether it was safe. So we heard you, and we're going to walk through these now. So let me just give you again a little bit of an overview. I think it was pretty clear that I started from the Saber-Cat Park and I went west. As you can see, that the existing trail is in dashed on this slide, and then we would connect into it on a paved road. There's a East Plaza. This is a spot that has been identified that is not as noisy. It's a little distance from the freeway, and you can stand there. You can still look over the entire East Bay without the freeway noise. And so we've kind of put that plaza a little bit distant from the bridge, but then as the bridge allows you to have also some other views, but also connect over to the west, where again on that mound where we proceed along the kind of the more riparian portion of the I-680 right of way there before we descend down. And there is a mound there, so we are descending down to Osgood. And there we have the steep crossing where we delineate exactly where the pedestrians and bicycles are separated in a demarked asphalt. And then it continues over to the overhead bridge over the rail crossing. Those are the areas we're going to focus on today. But again, just as I was noting earlier, the North Trail crosses Saber-Cat Creek in a small prefabricated bridge. And then the trail would be kind of more or less cut into the hillside, but it would be above the existing uses along Osgood Road, but well below the residences that are on the mound just above. So it shouldn't be in anybody's backyard. It would just kind of slide along the hillside there. But we're going to focus on like I said, the major structures along this route. But first, I'd like to talk about some of the public concerns, and Hans is going to help me out in addressing how we think about the existing Saber-Cat Creek Trail.
Great, thank you, Jody. And so one thing that we heard from many folks in the past meetings was the question about the suitability of the existing Saber-Cat Trail within the park. And as you can see in these pictures, there are some areas of the trail that are quite narrow. And so, the issue is, if we're going to open this up, to greater use, is the existing trail sufficient? And so our conclusion has been that the existing trail is not sufficient. And so included in the project now are plans to do what we call kind of a mitigation plan on the existing trail so that it is wider and safer to accommodate both a mix of use, people out for a recreational stroll, and others that may be biking through the area. So we'll be looking at ways that we can treat that. If I could show the next slide. So this kind of indicates, Fremont's current standard for trail design, and it identifies a minimum 10-foot width for combined walking and biking. So there are parts of the existing trail that don't meet these standards, and so we would be upgrading them. The other thing that's worth pointing out is that we are underway with a citywide trail master plan that is looking at a variety of different new trail corridors, but we're also looking at the suitability of our existing trail design standards. And it is very likely that we may be moving to a 12-foot paved standard with additional room on the side for people that are maybe jogging or walking their dogs. And so the effective width of, future trail corridors would be wider. And we'll be looking at sort of the improvements on the existing Saber-Cat corridor through the lens of these new standards and the expected use that we would have. So we hope that we'll be able to address that concern. The other thing that's come up is the variable speed of folks that are coming through here, and we've heard concerns that folks that are out for a stroll want to be able to enjoy the nice environment of the park. And then also, have folks that are passing through on a bike to do so in a safe and calm manner. So we're also looking at trail calming elements that would be put in place that would control for folks that are on bikes from not, coming through here at an excessive speed. And so there are some things in the corridor now for folks that have used it, such as these cattle gates, that people have to go around and slow down. And so that's an example of maybe some of the existing calming that's out there, but we'll be taking a much closer look at some of those details as part of the project, and to ensure that there is a pleasant and safe environment for all users of the area. Next slide, please. So another idea that we received, and we very much appreciate this, is a suggestion to expand the access of the new bridge over 680 to include other corridors and neighborhoods. And so what this illustrates is a suggestion to connect the bridge to the existing Saber-Cat Road and the Pine Avenue neighborhoods that are to the south. So there have been a couple of suggestions on how to do that, and these are two examples. We think that that is a good idea, worth a further study. And so we're including, as part of our review of the project scope, to include that additional access point. So we'll be evaluating that in terms of kind of the scope and cost and any issues that may be associated with that concept. So again, another example of community input that we're looking to address. The third item I wanted to mention is the accommodation of a museum as part of the project. In our initial planning, we were looking at the opportunity to place a museum on the Caltrans property that's just to the west of 680, and thought, this is a vacant piece of land. It would be a good spot for the museum. It's up on the hill. Well, as we've done further coordination with Caltrans, we've come into a number of complications around possibly using that. One is that the land is part of the I-680 freeway corridor. It's part of the operating right-of-way, and this is a federal interstate route. And the space is actively being used for other Caltrans purposes. So there may be an issue that this is land that may not be available or would take a very long time to get approval for. And so we are kind of separating kind of the issues between the museum location and the planning for the bridge and the trail, so that one doesn't sort of hang up the other. But we're also, in the event that we're not able to place the museum at that location, we are looking at a couple of other options. And so they're illustrated here on this exhibit. And so one is at the corner of Osgood and Blakehow, which would have access to the trail. The other would be up closer to the Irvington BART station near the Gallegos Winery ruins, and that would have access off the northern trail. And so the intent is to plan a museum in the area. And so we wanted to just share with you that there are some other alternatives that we're considering. And we'll be looking at them from a variety of different things, and we'd love to hear any input that you all have tonight about any of these alternatives. Thank you, Jody.
Good evening, everybody. Once again, my name is Mark Ashley, and I'm working with the design team. I am a bridge engineer. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the structures and also get into a little bit more detail about the alignment that we're showing here, which is sort of our first evolution since that scoping report that Jody talked about earlier. I'm going to start on the west side this time, and then we'll move over to the east side. So next slide, Jody. So here we're sort of zoomed in on the west side. You can see where our alignment starts at the turnaround on Blake Howe Road, west of the railroad corridor. We're going to cross the railroad. I'll talk about that in a second. Proceed along the other side of Blake Howe Road, have a protected bicycle and pedestrian intersection at Osgood. This is also where we would interface with the future East Bay Greenway Trail, which would be on along the west side of Osgood. Then our trail would extend over to the Caltrans right-of-way that Hans just finished describing. It's sort of a triangular piece of open land being used right now for Caltrans earthwork operations for 680 projects and other projects in the area. So what we're trying to do is align the path. Jody, if you go back, align the path along sort of the perimeter of that property, the west leg and then the north leg. And that allows us to leave as much space as possible for Caltrans continued earthwork operations. We are going to need to get their permission to, have the trail pass through the state right-of-way. Another thing nice about this alignment is it puts the trail up along the existing Sabercat Creek on the north leg of that property. So it'll be kind of following the tree line, and we would come up with a design that would stay, would be close enough to the creek, but would not impact the creek. So that's just kind of an overview of this west end of the project. Now I want to zoom into the crossing of the railroad tracks. Here, we're looking at a plan view, bird's eye view on the bottom, and sort of an elevation view from the side at the top. That would be looking to the north. So west is to the left in the lower view. You can see the Blake Howe turnaround. And we would be starting the path more or less in the middle of that to stay as far away from private properties as possible. We then would have to cross the railroad tracks. Now, I think in the last meeting, we presented the two options of going under or going over. We've opened a dialogue with both BART and the Union Pacific Railroad. And what we found is really the only thing they would consider in this case would be to go over. They're very concerned about the impact of attempting to tunnel under their tracks and what effect that might have on their operations. So that's what we're showing. That's what we're sort of moving forward with at this point. Now, to get up high enough to get over the tracks, as you can see in the upper view, these ramps that switch back and forth. And so they're kind of stacked on top of each other in a very tight loop kind of pattern. It would be a structural system that you walk up on. We would also have a stair as an option to get up, or you could take the ramp, which would just be a longer walk. We've come up with this very compact system and plan view to maintain a maximum buffer between the path and the adjacent private properties. And in that buffer, we could do landscaping to provide screening and privacy there. As we cross the railroad tracks, we're planning to use a prefabricated bridge system, probably a prefabricated steel truss that we could use to just span the entire right-of-way without really touching down in it. And that's going to allow us to get through the approvals with BART and UPRR as quickly as possible. And then as we cross to the east side of the tracks, we would have another ramp system similar to what I just described on the west that would be oriented toward the north side of Blake Howe Road. And that way we could maintain two-way traffic on Blake Howe, particularly for access. You can see that sort of alleyway road just east of the railroad tracks in the aerial photo here. That's the primary access for the city's maintenance equipment for the Corp Yard that's just to the south. So then coming off the ramp, we would also have a stairway on this side, and then we would proceed with the path at grade along Greenway. Next. These are just other views. The top left, you can see the existing condition at the Blake Howe turnaround. This would be where our project would start on the west end. And then in the right-hand view, there's sort of a visual simulation of the stairway and the ramps going up. And you can see here the amount of buffer area we would have on either side that could be landscaped to provide, you know, a buffer to those existing private properties on both sides. So now we're going to move over to the east side. And so on the left side of this view, I just described this with the orange trail following the creek. And then we connect with the west landing of the bridge over 680. We're calling it a bicycle pedestrian overcrossing. That's Caltrans terminology. And so that's shown in sort of this fuchsia color. We have one constraint on the east side of the freeway. This kind of brown shading area is a biological mitigation site that Caltrans built in connection with I-680, the Express Lanes projects to mitigate impacts to both wetlands and other resources with those projects. So that's an issue. We need to try to minimize impacts to that. What we have here is we're bridging over it. And so we're going to attempt to not put any permanent structures down within that brown shaded area and even minimize any temporary impacts to that. And that will be one of Jody's challenges, to work with the resource agencies. This is regulated by California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at the federal level. And it's protected in perpetuity because it is mitigation for impacts that occurred. So that's something that's going to be one of our challenges to work through with those agencies to get approval to put the bridge across that. And then, as Jody described earlier, we'll be connecting with a new at-grade path that's shown in yellow that would wind its way around and connect to the existing trail. And then that yellow dot there would be an interpretive plaza that would be an educational place, a place that people could pause. There would be interpretive displays for paleontology and history of the area. And also you would have great views out to the west and out toward the bay from that spot. And so with that, you know, the bridge was shown in fuchsia on that slide. And now this is the bridge, kind of this S-curve. And so now I want to introduce our bridge architect, Noel Shamble, to go through his process and some of the design concepts that he's come up with for that crossing of I-680. Noel?
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Mark. Delighted to be here to share these ideas with you all. So continuing Mark's fuchsia theme there, I'll direct your attention to the fuchsia text on this slide. And this is a slide I showed last time in our first community meeting, in which I was illustrating the design process that we like to follow for our bridge projects. And so first, before we even get into too much conceptual development, we like to sit down and think about a theme. And so, like I mentioned last time, a theme is really our way of kind of packaging many different aspects of what are going to be the guiding principles of the project. So those could be the character or the values or things like that. And ideally, we adhere to that theme all the way through the project, and that helps us resolve a totally holistic vision in the end. So we shared some themes. If you just go back real quick, Jody, I'll just talk about sorry. So after the theme, then we go into concept development, and then detail development. And so right now we're right there at the beginning of concept development. So we're going to recap what we heard about the themes and then also present to you some of those early concepts. So last time I presented a couple of quick themes that made sense to us for the site. Of course, the SaberCat heritage, paleontological inspirations, anything from fossil bones to more geometric kind of rhythmic shapes, more contemporary interpretations of those sorts of things, as well as the natural history of the setting is definitely something to draw inspiration from. And then we threw out other things to discuss, such as the kind of contemporary architecture that's being built in the town and more largely in the Bay Area as a whole. And so what we heard back from you guys was some great input. We definitely heard that people agreed it made great sense to connect to that SaberCat theme, to that fossil kind of bone iconography, whether that be more subtle or more literal. We're trying, kind of varying the options on each concept. And then of course, we also heard that people want to integrate the bridge into the natural setting as much as possible. And not just integrate it, but elevate and celebrate what a great resource that is. And so with that in mind, in a more practical sense, we heard things like taller cable supported structures such as this cable stay bridge. People would rather not have considered because it's just too imposing, too tall and imposing on the site. And so we've decided to move away from tall cable stayed structures such as this, which leaves us with some exciting concepts to show you. So we have 6 concepts I'm going to walk you through, and they range in complexity from a little bit more simpler to a little bit more involved. And Jody's going to kindly click along a slideshow while I sort of narrate over the top of them and see if we can get it about right. So we'll start off on the simplest end of things. This first concept we simply call the flow. It's following kind of the subtle S curve that, as Mark mentioned, kind of navigates the different alignment challenges that we have there. Has many columns, which means many spans and lots of flexibility there. The structure is a concrete box girder, and for all intents and purposes, it's not too dissimilar from a common Caltrans box girder that you might see throughout California. Now, of course, being bridge designers, we want to strive for a little bit better than that. And so we hope that we could detail it with some, nice corners and materials that would elevate it a little bit. So this would kind of be your sort of clean and simple and elegant type solution. It's worth noting that on all these concepts, we do have a requirement to have an 8-foot fence, protective barrier over the Caltrans highways. And so that, when you're thinking about the views that you'll have out over the bay, that will certainly be something to consider. So here we have the last view here, kind of that view from the bridge deck looking out towards the valley. That fencing material will strive to be as transparent as possible. And as we merge the bridge into the landscapes on either end, as we leave that space over the freeway, we can blend those fences down to more of a traditional railing height. So it doesn't necessarily be that tall the whole time. Now, taking a step up from that kind of baseline level, we have the flow spine. This is the same sort of structure type, but now we're trying to add a few little bits of flair to it, kind of punch up that SaberCat iconography a little bit more. So we have added a little bit of a dynamic rhythmic system to both the fence structure and to the underlying structure type itself. So you can see underneath we have a series of repeating ribs, and then the fence itself is a very dynamic fence post that actually can kind of change over the length of it. As I mentioned, sort of taller where it needs to be over the highway, but then getting shorter on the approaches on either end. And then this kind of striking, nice undulating edge curve line, rather than being straight, it kind of morphs up and down across the length, giving it a really dynamic and lively sort of sinuous effect. really connecting the eye from one side of the highway to the other, all in one fell swoop. But still, hopefully, you know, kind of understated and kind of subtly iconic is sort of the goal for this one. Now, still within that same sort of concrete girder family, we have this version C, which is the haunched ribs. So now we're looking at slightly haunched girder spans, still multiple spans. Because these spans are haunched, we don't have the extreme flexibility to, you know, make those smooth S curves as the previous two, but we can still curve things a little bit because there are numerous columns. And then to try to play up that SaberCat fossil idea a little bit more, we've added kind of a rib structure that comes up to the fence. And in contrast to the previous two, this one, we're looking at more rounded shapes, more curves and softer edges, just to provide that kind of alternative vision for you guys to look at. Now with these next three at the halfway point here, we're going to kind of ramp it up a little bit in the complexity department. This is now an arch structure, but we're arching below deck. And so this is actually a structure type that's kind of common historically in bridges throughout California, the spandrel arch. And this is a concept that takes advantage of the site that we have here. We have a really high walking path relative to normal crossings we would do. So we do have a lot of space below the bridge deck to play with, a lot of leeway where we can put a lot of that structure. And our idea here is to kind of take those vertical support spandrels, those legs on top of the arch, and kind of detail them to play with that SaberCat iconography and kind of make it look more like a vertebrae or spine type system. It has a lot of light and shadow play that would be really dynamic silhouette, you know, constantly changing depending on what time of day you're viewing it at, what time of season. And definitely something that's, you know, even though it has its roots in historical forms, it's definitely something that is very unique and not seen before. And the benefit of putting a lot of that structure below the deck is you still get those great views from the deck looking out towards the valley. Now this next structure type, we start to take away a few of the piers, a few of the columns, and so we have larger spans. The advantage here is that we can kind of more easily branch over some of those, or bridge over some of those tricky challenges like Mark mentioned, like the mitigation area and things like that. So here we have a 3-span structure that is a hybrid structure between arches framing on either side with a sort of underslung suspension system in the middle. This really creates a very unique, iconic structure that's very dynamic, always changing depending on what view you're looking at it from. And for this, we drew inspiration not just from the opportunities that the site allows us with the clearances, but also from the rolling hills of the adjacent natural setting, and then again the secondary structural members are trying to create that repeating rhythmic rhythm of sort of the SaberCat fossil idea. And this one has structure both above deck and below deck, but the idea here is that kind of as you walk through it, you're sort of having a dynamic experience where you're enveloped within the structure at some points, and then you get to the middle of the span and the kind of structure drops away and you get this grand view out over the bay, and then you're kind of brought back within the kind of cathedral of the space again, sort of shifting spaces as you go through, which is great to kind of mix up a longer span like this. A span like this would be a little bit more suited to a straighter alignment because these components are all kind of connected together in a row. And then finally, the suspended SaberCat concept. This really arose out of an idea to touch the land as lightly as possible and also be as transparent as possible. And so, as I mentioned early on, right off the bat, we wanted to go away from the tall cable supported structures, but there is a structure type here where we can use a suspension type structure where we undersling the main cables below the deck and take advantage of that large clearance we have over the roadway, and then use a kind of secondary structural system of ribs to hold up a very light and thin deck. And so not only are the cables light, but the deck system itself is much thinner than those previous girder concepts, those three at the beginning. Again, we get a really dynamic structure across its length because that angle of incidence, angle of connection at each of those points is slightly changing. Every little rib is changing, and so as you go through it, you're really in this fluid, dynamic experience that goes from, again, more open and exposed, where we have the great views, to a little bit more enclosed next to the tower, and then back out again. And again, this concept, because it is so direct, it works best on a straight alignment. It also has inherent challenges with anchoring on either end of the abutments, anchoring those cables. But overall, as you can see, it's definitely a striking idea, and would, again, be something that not only is not seen in Fremont or the Bay Area, but even worldwide. We do projects all over, and so these kind of last two concepts would certainly put Fremont on the map globally in that sense. Now, to compare them all real quick, we listed them all here. And I'd just say again that kind of the top three could sort of be categorized together, those three sort of girder types. They're all going to be about a similar family of costs because they're simpler structures. They would have more modest cost. Alternative D is going to be kind of a next step up, both constructability wise and cost wise. And then E and F are going to be topping out the complexity and therefore the cost as well. And then here's kind of the text version of that rundown, of that synopsis, for those people that don't get to hear my eloquent descriptions and are just reading about this later online. But I'd encourage you to read through some of these details. Again, the column placements and the cost and the alignment, as well as the more dynamic and stylistic features of the concepts are all, of course, different. And so with that, I just like to say it's been a pleasure generating these concepts and working off of your feedback. And we really look forward to getting a new round of feedback and continuing to refine what we have going here moving forward.
Great. Thank you very much, Noel. It's hard to top that lovely presentation because my slides are not as much eye candy as that. But I also wanted to make sure to talk about a little bit of the environmental effects that we are evaluating. We look at the natural, the human, as well as social impacts of any project, whether it be a building or a roadway or a trail and a bridge. And so listed here are the studies that we are conducting right now. We've done some draft, some are not yet complete, so I don't have a lot of information to offer you. But I wanted to make sure that these were listed and in front of you so that in case there is a piece of our studies or something in particular that you'd like to contribute to, I just want to put a big call out to Joyce Bluford, who has amazing resources and knowledge of this area, and she has already been valuable in consulting with her on paleontological as well as cultural resources found in the area. And that is just one example of the resources found inside your community. And we're doing our best to bring our specialists in to provide as much accurate and detailed information about how this project will interact, both beneficially as well as impacts. And those impacts we are identifying as early as possible. Even prior to developing these designs, we delineated habitats and various resources to avoid so that we can kind of, in essence, thread the needle and try to be light-handed on this beautiful resource that you have. So habitat, wildlife species, water quality, the drainage, paleontological resources and cultural resources I already mentioned, traffic. What I also wanted to mention that we look at not only the footprint, the long-term footprint, but we also look at the construction impacts, that period that leads to the process. The good news here is that in consulting with construction teams, we feel that this entire project could be, if it were fully funded and it were built all at once, we could most likely build all of these pieces under 2 years. Of course, that is funding dependent, and so we look at kind of, in essence, the worst case scenario. The worst case in construction being that everything is built at once, and what would that scenario do to the roadways and the community that's living adjacent to this this project. So we look at the consistency with the plans, visual impacts, noise during construction is another one, air quality. Obviously, if we can encourage more pedestrian, bicycle alternatives to the vehicle, that actually does have benefits for air quality and greenhouse gas. And of course, that's another emphasis for this project, is making that connection to the BART so that people are having safe access to alternative modes of transportation. So hazardous materials, we've done a search on what's local and what needs to be avoided or thought through. So I just walked through these as slowly as I could without providing a lot of detail, because I wanted to make sure you were reflecting on all of these resources, and that if it triggers something that you'd like to comment on, then please do. And I do see we are rounding up our presentation. Thank you very much for listening and being patient, but I do see there are quite a few comments that have been already put in the chat, and we're going to get to those really shortly. So by way of finishing up here, I just wanted to make sure that you understand that we do take your input very seriously, and I hope you've seen a lot of that reflected today. Like I said, we initially gathered input in June and July, and we've gathered and posted that information on the web for you. Here we are again today in the fall, trying to collect more information, both verbally as well as all of the chats. Anything you've written will be recorded and collected. And then again, we encourage you to email and write. And so as we refine the project and further avoid and minimize, then we will be proceeding to pull together an environmental document, which should be out in early next year. And then we will ask for your review and comment then as well. But if we were to just focus on the comments that we hope to obtain today, we are providing a 2-week window. That does not mean you're limited to the 2-week windows. It just means that we will collect the comments within up through November 5th and try to distill those into a summary so that we kind of have at least a point in time where we've collected your input. It's always good to have kind of a target to receive your input, but that by no means it's your last opportunity. So please make sure to notice that on the website where this project is posted, we provide updates there when we can, and we also make sure and kind of put little blasts via the Nextdoor app and postings on the web so that you can remain engaged and understand what's going on. So again, like I told you, there's an email address that goes directly affiliated with this project. Obviously, you can write, but we want your input on our project purpose, our objectives. What do you like? What do you dislike? How will it affect you? Have we been considering everything that you think needs to be considered? All of these are very valuable. So with that, we are going to open it up. We are going to first read through the chats. Eva Cheng, our assistant here, will help. I'm kind of running the show and doing a few things, so she's going to help me walk through those, and then we will hold it open to question and answer following those chats. So Eva, I'm hoping that you will remove yourself from mute, and we'll see if we can walk through the chats that have been provided so far.
Okay, so we have a bunch of questions. First one is from Sean V. He asks, are there any plans to mitigate the existing Sabercat Trail area wildlife, i.e. coyotes, bobcats, and mountain lions, from traveling across the raised pathway over I-680 into the neighborhoods on the other side of the freeway?
So I'm going to see if, I wonder, can you see the chats on my screen? Am I sharing those? Can anybody go yes or no?
Cannot see them.
No? Okay, all right. I'm sorry. I tried to post them, but with that, is it possible that Hans, you would like to continue? You did answer a portion of this already.
Sure. Yeah, I think, I mean, I saw in the chat a couple of questions, related to wildlife, and maybe just kind of as for context of the audience, I think primarily what we're wanting this feedback so that we can sort of bring experts sort of within the city organization or the experts that are doing the environmental studies for the project can answer them more specifically. And these are things that we'll incorporate into frequently asked questions that we'll post on our website, or will be integrated into the environmental studies that we have. So I don't know I have an answer to this, but kind of the question is, by building this new bridge, is this going to open up, corridors for wildlife to travel through?
Yes.
And the other one is by introducing more people into the existing trail corridor, is that going to have an impact on existing wildlife? And so I think, those are good questions and concerns. As part of the project, we work to avoid or minimize impacts to the environment. And so there may be things that are either done with the design, or we can consult experts to get an assessment on the degree of significance that would be a problem. So from city side, I don't have a good answer to that. I don't know, Jody, if you do.
I feel a little embarrassed because I was reading the very first portion of the comment and I didn't register really quickly about the wildlife portion of that. So I'm sorry to have delegated that to you. I think you did a wonderful job. Thank you. Our feeling, we are looking at the wildlife and the virtues of the corridor. One thing we are trying to do is stay a little distance from the corridor. A lot of the migratory paths for the wildlife are the drainages. And so we're trying to have a good distance from the drainages. Whether or not a deer or a bobcat could be enticed to go over this pedestrian bridge, it's generally unlikely because, like I said, they kind of follow the forage paths. That doesn't mean it's impossible. I have been in urban areas where I've seen deer right in my backyard and I have no idea how they got there. So, but we will record that comment and in the follow on. So thank you, Hans, for doing a good job there. Eva, I'm not tracking which order you're going, so I'm going to leave it up to you to read the next one.
I'm just going from top to bottom. So the next question is from anonymous attendee who asked pretty similar question about the wildlife. Are you aware that Sabercat Creek at the western end is a virtual wildlife sanctuary? Bobcat, deer, coyote, etc. Introducing bicycles into this area will drive the wildlife out.
Similar response, but thank you very much. We're aware of the wildlife and we have done wildlife surveys in this area. So thank you for that input, though. We recognize that.
The next question is from Sandra Chen. I'm concerned that the criminals will use this extension bridgeway to hide out in the Forest Creek area, and therefore it'll become unsafe for the residents. Homeless people can also use this bridgeway to come stay at the creek area, therefore another problem for the residents.
Yeah, so let me, again, we appreciate the question. And I think our goal is to design the facility and operate it in a way that it's safe for the community. On the topic of homelessness, that's an issue that Fremont is doing a lot to try to manage and reduce the number of homeless people in the community. And so I think, these questions are good ones that we can ask our public safety staff and our human services department about how they feel that these corridors can be addressed from kind of perspective of crime safety and managing any issues related to homelessness. I think generally, though, both of these issues are something that are lessened with the number of people that are active in an area. And so there is kind of a school of thought that more use, more eyes on the trail basically, discourages both homeless from encamping there, as well as it being a place that's attractive for criminals to hide. But again, appreciate the question. It's something, we'll consult our experts and provide a more detailed response.
All right, the next question is from another one from Sean. Have we considered the potential fire concerns related to more people congregating in the Sabercat Trail area, particularly if more people have access to the park area after dark via the footbridge crossing I-680? Considering the large spike in fires in California recently and the existing fire danger from the dry, dead grass in the hills surrounding the Sabercat Trail, it seems like this area is potentially a larger fire risk in general.
Yeah, I would say kind of similar to the other ones. We certainly want to design it in a way that is safe and is kind of manages any risk from fires. So this is one that, we'll consult our fire department on any concerns they have with the existing corridor or any concerns that would be raised with the project.
Okay, next question is from Ryan Garcia. Are there any plans to ensure homeless camps that are located under the Washington Boulevard Bridge along the BART tracks and Roberts Avenue do not move west on the Neil Trail and into Sabercat Park? The park has a significant amount of dry vegetation. It is a fire hazard. These homeless camps often include people using fires and stoves to cook food, stay warm, and as lighting. Sabercat Park in Hillside is very difficult to access for firefighters. A potential fire could cause substantial damage to the whole area. Has anyone thought about that? The senator mentioned climate change in his video, and Mayor May has expressed concern about wildfire. Lindsay V also, sorry. The answers just disappeared on me. Lizzie V also said, we are concerned about this as well. We have observed small homeless camps pop up at the end of Ocaso Camino, as well as down by the trail by Banda Terrace. They have been temporary, but with the direct access across I-680 to BART, we are worried that there's a higher potential for these homeless camps to Sabercat Park.
Okay, yeah, again, thanks for those comments. And so, yeah, the issue of homelessness and fire safety, those are things that we'll need to consult our experts on that, and we'll provide a response.
Right, the next one is the proposed bridge runs very close to the Hayward Fault. In regard to design and engineering of the bridge, what considerations have there been about the risk of a major earthquake sitting on the fault? Could you please share more about the plans to address it?
So Jody, I suppose that one's for me.
I'm going to give you the baton, yes.
Yes, we are very aware of the Hayward Fault, running fairly close to the west landing of the I-680 overcrossing. And, that's been one of the considerations in determining where that bridge landing would be located. We have a very good geotechnical consultant on our team who actually has done the fault studies for the proposed BART station. And so they are very familiar with the fault and have already done a lot of study on it. And in fact, they've already given us some preliminary recommendations for how much potential movement might be expected, either at that landing support or even, differential movement. We call it fault rupture between that support and the next one over closer to the freeway. Those estimates that we've received, we think they're manageable. There will need to be, it'll be a major design consideration. We'll have to design features into the bridge that allow it to survive that type of event and that type of occurrence. But we also have a lot of experience designing bridges for things like that, close proximity to faults. The Bay Bridge that we designed is between Hayward and San Andreas, and is designed for very strong ground motions. And we've done projects like the seismic retrofit of the San Diego Coronado Bay Bridge, where we had this same situation with a fault that ran right under the bridge. So there's a lot of techniques we can use, but that will definitely be something we'll be aware of and taking into account in the design.
Okay, Rick Hirsch has several comments, so I'll just read them all at once. The bicycle link between
Ohlone
College and the BART station is well served by the Washington Boulevard connector. This is poor planning trumping reality. Why are you forcing bicycles into the serene setting? Hans Larson rode the bike for the first time 2 weeks ago. This shows staff's unawareness of the setting. This is wrong. Provide a separate relocated bike path. And
If I could, really briefly there, one thing that I did not go into a lot of detail, and I really feel like I failed to mention that we had a lot of comments about people that like to bicycle with their families for recreational purposes, and we're very encouraged that there were opportunities that were not along the busy roadways. And even if bicycles were going to be considered upon busy roadways, that there needed to be wider shoulders and more separation. So I want to offer that it's true that there are more than one way to enjoy this scenery, and it's understood that there is some concern for the pedestrians with bicycles, and I do feel that the city has taken those comments just as seriously and as intently as providing other recreational opportunities for both pedestrians and bicycles. So I don't disagree with, I'm not disagreeing with Rick, I should say, but I do want everybody to know that the city is taking the safety and the concern for both the pedestrians and the bicycles very seriously. And you're up to Eva?
Yeah, I'm trying.
Yeah,
the
it
questions
pops.
keep moving around, so I keep losing my place. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I will offer that there are 32 comments, and we may not be able to answer each one of them. So maybe what we'll do is we'll go ahead and kind of let you list a few comments and then see if we want to go back. But some of them do repeat the same theme. So we'll see how it goes.
Ryan has a question about, it's more related for the BART station. He's asking why BART is putting another station in Irvington. So
Okay.
I don't think we can answer that because we're not BART. Sorry.
Well, there's probably a lot of reasons for that, but the main reason is that they do extensive ridership analysis before they decide to make such an investment. And this is a priority development area, which means that they have identified this as a key area where a community can enhance the pedestrian and bicycle opportunities with development, and that this is a prime area for that. So, but that is outside the project purview. So maybe we'll continue to the next comment.
Sandra Chen also asked, can people climb over the edge of the bridge and jump down to the 680?
I'll give that one a shot. That's something that I think if people are determined enough to do something like that, they'll find a way. And it does happen, unfortunately. But the bridge railings will be designed to, the current standards to not only discourage climbing and discourage people trying to do something like that, especially with the height of 8 feet. And when you saw some of Noel's concepts with the inverted or, the overhanging piece at the top, that makes it even more difficult. And also in addition to that, preventing people from throwing objects down onto traffic.
Okay.
All right, next question from William. What are the costs for the various bridge options?
So I'll take that one again too. We really haven't gotten to the point of doing the level of engineering and design on those bridge concepts that would be needed to do quantity takeoffs and, do the actual cost estimates. But relatively speaking, the first 3 options that are pretty conventional designs are going to be very low cost and, very affordable type of structures. Even with the aesthetic enhancements that Noel showed on the B and C options, those are going to be fairly economical. I could say probably in the neighborhood of 10 million or so for the structure, somewhere in that neighborhood. And then as we move into the last three, you're starting to get into some, more complicated designs, more difficult to construct, probably, expensive materials and whatnot. And those could be, higher into the even 20, maybe $30 million range. So we do have some large differences in potential cost, but we will be getting into that in detail when we get into the structure type selection process, where we actually do have the engineering and the quantities and everything to do a more reliable cost estimate. And then we'll be consulting with the city on, those ranges of cost in going through the type selection process.
Okay. Next question, the next two questions comments are from Lynn Miller. All of these designs are awful looking. From B to E, they get worse. If any of these are chosen, I predict Fremont will be the laughingstock of the West Coast. And I agree with Rich Hurst that putting heavy traffic of commuter cyclists along the protected endangered frog habitat area with 10, 12-foot widening is inappropriate. Follow up, let's see, the next comment is from Mel. I have lived on the trail for 30 years. The traffic in the canyon has skyrocketed since the more recent development. The amount of dog crap on the trail is really overwhelming. And he or she has also commented about the bridge design. The first three are okay, but the second three are truly unique. As a Silicon Valley engineer for 40 years, go for unique, make a mark. Those are special. Next comment is from William. Where are the connections to the Greenway Trail, both north and south from the Irvington station?
Eva, I think I covered that in the presentation. The Greenway would run along the west side of Osgood, and our trail would interface with it right there at the Blake Howe Osgood intersection.
Okay, and he has a follow-up question. Where are the connections that extend the Sabercat Trail beyond Pine Street? If these plans don't exist, then where are they in the plans?
So let me address that. And I think kind of the context is, so the city is doing, as a separate effort, a citywide trail master plan. And so additional links like the East Bay Greenway Trail, which was just mentioned, or extending the Sabercat Trail to connect to the trail system up to Mission Peak is part of a future gap closure that we're looking at, as well as part of an overall citywide trail strategy.
And next question from Sandra, I believe we've already answered. Is there a plan to broaden the existing trail if the trail will be for the bike and pedestrian usage? I was there last week and the trail was narrow. Some areas are really not safe for bikers. Any additional comments on that?
No, I mean, this, perhaps she was late to the presentation, but the trail, the city is looking at, they were calling it kind of a mitigation plan or an enhancement to the existing trail to make sure that they are compatible.
Okay. Next question from Iris. Are there any images of what the views would be like from the bridge?
And so there is going to be a visual impact assessment, and we have taken photos, kind of the before and after. Obviously, Noel showed almost 6 different variations of views. None of those views were, well, some of those views were from the deck, but they didn't have the drop of the actual photo behind them to show you that. So we'll look into that a little bit more to see if we can articulate that. Obviously, if you have been on any sort of pedestrian overcrossing, you will know that there is fencing, and so that does constrict some of you. And when we do the visual simulation, that becomes a little bit stronger than your experience, because your eye could sometimes blur the fence in the foreground, so that you have access to the foreground images. So it might not convey very well in a visual impact assessment, before and after picture, but we are trying to do our best at showing what the views of and from the park will be.
But Jay Buck is asking, are the bridge alignments avoiding the Caltrans wetlands, and who selects the preferred bridge alternative?
So yes, we have that sort of sinuous alignment that we showed is our best effort to avoid as much of the Caltrans biological mitigation site as possible. We did have the possibility of just going straight across the freeway from the east landing to the west landing, and that would go across those wetlands. And so that's why we put the S-curve in it, to try to avoid that.
Well, let me address the second one on the preferred bridge alternative. So again, we very much are interested in feedback from the community on things that you like. I think from the city's perspective, we're kind of looking at sort of two scenarios. One is kind of the sort of best affordable one, or lower cost, which probably is represented through the first three options. There are, opportunities to get funding from state and federal grants to do something special and iconic. And so we're considering, having a second alternative, that if we wanted to do something special and that, really accentuated really the fascinating history of the area, and something that's really special to the context. If we're able to get, funding, for a special design, we'd like to consider that opportunity. Appreciate the comment that was raised, is that, hey, this is going to be here for probably 50 or 100 years, and, kind of give it your best shot. So that's kind of the spirit that we're looking at. So we're both, again, taking a practical approach in terms of cost, but if we can do something iconic, we certainly think that the setting here is worthy of that consideration. Second piece is, ultimately, this is a bridge over a Caltrans freeway. So they will have essentially final say in terms of any option or options that we decide to go forward with.
Okay, now Andreas asks, is it possible to have a direct bike connection from the East Plaza to Washington Boulevard via a trail paralleling the hillside at I-680 coming out near Castillo Road?
I would say that's not something that we've looked at, but we appreciate the suggestion, and we'll go take a look at that and see if we think, there's merit to having that additional connectivity. I think, overall, Fremont is trying to, build a connected system of trails for both recreation and transportation. And so, as we indicated in the presentation, there have been other suggestions about some new connections. So if there's some community ideas on how we can make connections to the bridge even better, we're very interested in hearing those and giving them consideration. Thank you.
All right, Michelle asks, is there consideration for movement of native animals? Would they use the pedestrian bridge? Will birds be tempted to use the bridge structure as roosting and or nesting? And will attention be given along the trail to enhance the California native plants in addition to native fauna?
Okay, so we kind of spoke about animals using the ped bike bridges, and when that is encouraged and most effective, I mentioned that it's best when they are closest to the drainages, so like Saber Cat Creek or Mammoth Creek. In this situation, we're actually trying to minimize any sort of, or at least minimize impacts to the natural habitat and the riparian area. We're attempting to keep that as natural as possible. There are portions of the creek that already are very close to the creek. So we're not encouraging that. In terms of using the bridge, like I said, it's possible, but in terms of roosting or nesting, that is one of those issues that bridge engineers encounter quite a bit with bridges. Maybe Mark, you want to speak to that?
I was afraid you were going to turn that one.
Okay, well, I can say that there are ways to avoid that. There is certainly plenty of roosting and nesting abilities in the beautiful coastal live oaks that you have in the park. The bridge does not provide the best habitat because it is so busy and noisy that does affect a lot of the nesting periods. And there are ways for us to put different types of small netting or actually they're kind of like these high-pitched noises that people can't hear, but do tend to avoid birds from roosting on the bridge too. So there are some methods to avoid that.
Next question from Pat Gordon. Really appreciate the fossil resource recognition. And when will we hear more about the museum?
Hans, would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, so I mean, the museum is something that, is part of the planning of this project. And as we indicated that we may be looking at some other sites. So we, as the project continues its development, we'll continue advancing the planning of the museum.
William's question is, overall, the bridge will provide tremendous benefits to expand access to both sides of the freeway for residents. Have any traffic studies been completed showing an increase in bike pedestrian use and an incidental decrease in greenhouse gases?
To be honest, I could say qualitatively, yes. Can we estimate into the finite details of the greenhouse gas emissions reductions? No, it's not a very precise science down to, removing one car for one bicycler. So while we basically call this kind of a, people say carbon neutral or greenhouse neutral project, we feel that in general, if we can encourage more and more of these, then we do have an overall slower increase of, not as much increase for greenhouse gas. The point is that our right of ways are maxed out. And so it's not that we can easily add traffic. And so the congestion is really forcing people to look at alternatives on these in these urbanized areas. So yes, qualitatively, we do look at air quality and greenhouse gas. Can I be precise about how much benefit this will add? To be quite honest, the science isn't that finite because greenhouse gas is a little bit more of a regional resource issue. So yes and no is the answer to that one.
Okay. Nolan asks, the need to focus on pedestrian safety on Sabercat Trail is appreciated, but the suggestion that a 10-foot wide trail will be adequate is misplaced considering the curves and elevation changes of the trail and the lack of a flat area to either side.
Additional widening.
Yeah, just sorry, the question. Additionally, widening the existing trail has severe environmental impact. The separated bridge proposal eliminates the safety problems rather than only slightly reducing it.
Yeah, I would just say, as mentioned in the presentation, that's something that we're looking at more closely. And so the interest is to, get additional width in there where it's needed to serve the added use, but also design it in a way that, particularly bicycles that are going through there, are doing it in a calm and more recreational way. And so that includes things like calming measures, and slowing down traffic, making sure there's visibility around curves or slowing down movements in curved areas. So there'll be more work that's done on this kind of trail mitigation plan in order to meet the objectives of it being accommodating for all users and safe. Certainly, the notion of somebody wanting to travel fast through the corridor and they're comfortable riding on street, whether it's Washington or Pine or Sabercat, if that's viable. We would encourage folks and overall Fremont's trying to design, our on-street system to also be conducive and comfortable for people riding bikes. So looking at a variety of ways to move around Fremont, but I think we do feel that, that there is a very important sort of natural and recreational element to the Sabercat Historic Park and Trail, and that we want to, sort of enhance and preserve that, and open it up to a larger segment of the Fremont population. So there's more work to be done there, and we'll look forward to sharing more as we continue to develop the project.
Okay. Michelle asks, how much educational signage would be included to enhance shared usage and interaction with the natural setting? The last 3 designs are striking and will bring the paleontological history to life.
So the signage program is a little separate from our planning at this phase. We are trying to provide opportunities where that can be blended. And I don't know, Hans is really not more detail at this point, right? But the East Plaza is uniquely designed so that it could integrate signage and that kind of enhancements at a later date.
I think, yeah, that is what we see as part of the project, is that at that east side landing, that there's an interpretive plaza that has, more educational materials about, what's at the site and, the amazing history there. And so in addition to a museum, that, doing other things along the trail in the area are, part of what we're trying to accomplish.
Yvonne asks, is this bridge going to be a lighted bridge? If yes, all or just parts of the span?
That's going to be something we're going to be looking into later, the need for lighting. Typically on structures like these, there would be at a minimum some low-level deck lighting just for safety and visibility. We also have to consider what existing street lighting there is and how that's going to affect things. And then I think it also gets back to how the trail is going to be operated, and maybe Hans can talk to that.
Yeah, this was something that came up at the last meeting that I don't know if we touched on, is that the intention for the trail system is that it would continue to function and operate the way that it does now, as do Fremont Parks, so that it would be open only during the daylight hours and then closed at dusk. And so, the project as proposed now would continue that same level of operation. I think there's kind of an open question about whether, there's an opportunity, for access to the bridge and the East Plaza, and that may be something that's open for a longer time, and that, the larger part of the trail is closed. That's kind of an open question that we have, and, we're interested in hearing community feedback about the pros and cons of that. And we'll certainly refine that as we get more input from, community stakeholders and the sort of managers of the parks and the trail system within the city of Fremont.
Okay. Kelly asks, have any studies been done on the health benefits of access to nature for families with children? Are there any studies on the benefits of psychological and social benefits?
Well, certainly we do know that it is healthy to be outside. And although that's not the focus, I will say that our environmental document does not dive into that, but certainly we all know that fresh air and being outdoors is very healthy for the development of our families and our social well-being. So I could say yes. Whether our report will dive into those benefits, probably not, but it certainly has been part of the city's plan, in the trail master plan, the bicycle master plan, all of these, park and providing access to the resources is the intent to have a healthy city life.
Okay. Mal asks, can you really maintain a 5% grade from Sabercat to Osgood? That is a large height differential.
Mark?
Yeah, and the answer to that is yes. I agree. It's a big height differential. We've got about 85 feet of differential between the Osgood intersection and Sabercat Park. But we can do that with an average of about a 4.5% grade coming down.
Okay, the remaining questions look like they're comments. Let's see.
Let's just read them through. I'll just let everybody know that it is 8:08 and we are certainly here to hear your comments. So hopefully we can go through the rest of them. If they aren't questions, then we can just continue to read them out loud for the record. How about that?
Apparently a bunch of questions just showed up.
Oh, okay, okay.
All right, somebody asked, can you answer Mel's other question about wildlife? Which one is this?
Oh, do you really know how much wildlife is out there? I have doubts. That one?
Yes, apparently.
Okay. There are large groups of coyotes around Sabercat Trail, especially at night, large groups of 30+ turkeys, several families of deer, bobcats, and other animals that make appearances occasionally, not to mention snakes, squirrels, hawks, owls, and more. You're right. There are quite a variety of wildlife. Some are officially protected through the state and federal regulations, and others are not. But we still maintain that if we can minimize any sort of damage to these various different habitats, then we will avoid impacting these animals. I do understand that by having more frequent presence of people, then sometimes that does tend to reduce wildlife's presence. However, I maintain that this trail will be more or less distance from the drainage corridor. There are, this is a very beautiful natural open resource, and the intent is to maintain that. In fact, when we were looking at the habitats, there are areas that are non-native and that we can use an opportunity in building this trail to remove the non-natives and actually mitigate by replacing with more native plants and enhancing some of the habitat. And there are some fantastic areas to do that on this west end where this bridge would connect. Also, we're going through great pains to reduce any impact to that mitigation area that Mark called out, that I should have called out in my presentation. And I will tell you that we've done evening bat studies. We have looked for the green-legged frog. It does appear that the last sighting of the green-legged frog is more than, I think it was more than 2 miles away, and it didn't look like there was a strong connection here anymore. But we are not assuming that they are not there. We are more assuming that they are there and trying to stay far away from those habitats that are supporting these frogs. And as well as in terms of the coyotes and the deer, you know, there are urban areas that are really diminishing their ability to forage and move. But we feel that because this trail is for the most part used during the day, that doesn't affect those, that type of movement that those animals tend to do. So it's not perfect, but we do have to learn how to live compatibly with our wildlife. So thank you very much for your comments and your observations, and I will make sure that my biologist knows that there have been those sightings. So thank you.
Okay, Ryan asked, will lighting be added to the entire park? There is none currently. And will police or park rangers patrol the area?
So touched on that a little bit, is that the operation of the park is not intended to change. And so that also includes no plans to add lighting to the existing corridor. So that aligns with it not being open at night, but it's also recognized that this is an important wildlife habitat. And so introducing light, you know, would have an impact. In terms of park rangers, so they're, you know, throughout the city's park system, it does have rangers, and, you know, generally, you know, they are assigned to routes and locations based on, you know, the greatest need and demand. And so certainly, you know, this would be eligible for park ranger support, you know, kind of as sort of needed and warranted as a priority.
Okay, that is the end of the questions. Everything else is a comment, including one from Mayor May.
Do you want to read them out loud? Go
All of
ahead.
them? Okay.
Yeah.
So Mal writes, homeless have been living in the areas between Paseo Bridge and I-680. This trail is blind turn, so it presents problems for bikes and pedestrians. Lynn writes, if you believe a bridge crossing I-680 will be used well for connecting our city, then use another route for bicyclists. The biodiversity, wildlife, and fauna should remain safe and undisturbed. William writes, great presentation. Thanks to the staff and the consultants. Well done. And Mayor May writes, thank you for taking the time tonight as fellow neighbors and community members to participate and share your thoughts.
Great. Great.
Great.
Okay. Thank you.
So Jody, quickly, you may share when we'll come back next time. So
Yes. Okay. Yes, absolutely. I do want to remind people that we are hoping to receive your comments, any additional comments. These comments that you typed in tonight are recorded, and they will be printed out and are ready for us to review and ponder some more. But any other comments that you'd like to email or mail to us should be presented before November 5th so that we can include it in our summary. And then once we have done so and we've finished our environmental review, then we're going to come back in the spring and provide that environmental document for you to review. You'll see any sort of adjustments that we have made to the project, and we'll have another opportunity to hear from you and incorporate that before the City Council has made any sort of final decision process that would go. So we're anticipating the spring. And that is one of the major reasons for that. We could go a little faster, but we are very much trying to incorporate our partners with Caltrans. They certainly have a big say on how we cross their facility. And so, of course, there are some more coordination efforts that need to undergo before we can bring out the full environmental document to you. But we're getting there and we're making progress, and your comments are very valuable. So please don't hesitate. Thank you very much for taking the time. We will work with you throughout the development of this project.
Hey, Jody, we had one more question here down at the bottom. I think it got missed. It says this trail has blind turns, so it presents problems for bikes and pedestrians.
Yeah, I think she had combined that, reading that out loud, but
Okay.
thank you. Very good point.
Also, there's one person with their hand raised.
Oh, I did
so-
not see that.
Yeah, so I'm gonna allow, oh, actually, looks like he's left.
Okay.
So that's it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
from city also, thank you to the panelists and good presentation. And thank you to all community members who took the time to attend. Thank you, Councilmember Salwan. So we'll come back to you and, you'll hear from the city once again. Thank you all.
Great. With that, good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good
Thanks.
night.
Bye-bye.
Jody,
Yes.
I'm gonna end the recording here.